Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to this evening's webinar. I hope you're all sitting comfortably for an interesting session on digital innovation and the customer experience. But before we delve into these interesting topics, just a bit about what we're doing and who we are. So this is the Young Rail Professionals London South East Committee. My name is Simon Kendler and I'm the chair for this year. And Young Rail Professionals, we are an organisation whose job is to promote, inspire and develop the next generation of railway talent. So that's partly the idea of having an organisation available to those who are starting their careers in the industry, so they have the chance to connect, to network, to meet industry leaders and meet like-minded individuals that are starting out their careers. Because it's not just what you know, it's who you know, so we're a platform for that as well. And we can set up interesting events like this. So that's part of our remit. And also we have an outreach program, that's STEM Outreach, our Interrail program, which links with our Rail Week as well. And that is to provide a constant program of outreach events for kids in schools, students at universities, job seekers. We know how good the rail industry is, but we need to be telling the world how good it is as well and get people attracted to the industry to come in and bring in ideas and show off how the industry is a diverse place, an interesting place, stretches across the country, lots of different things going on, and one of those is being at the forefront of innovation. So to talk to you about that, because, well, frankly, we've got some very excellent speakers, and my YRP committee colleague, Brianna Towers, who's going to take you through our very interesting webinar for this evening. So over to you, Brianna.
Thank you, Simon. And to add to that, welcome everyone this evening. My name is Brianna Towers and I sit on the London and South East Committee. But you're not here to listen to me this evening. You're here to listen to these three wonderful people. And that is Kunal, David and Jim. I am going to pass over to Kunal though, and he will start us off with how digital asset management can be viewed from the customer context.
Hi everyone, hopefully you can hear me. So I'm going to talk about how digital asset management from a customer experience. I've spent about 13 years in the rail industry at London Underground with some of you I think that are on the call at the moment, and the last year with Arup. So I'm going to draw on some of the experiences that I've gained over this time. So to start with, what is asset management? According to the ISO standard, it's a coordinated activity of an organisation to realise value from assets. There should be a poll up, which is around, do you think our customers actually care about rail asset management? So I'd like you to poll. Do we see the results? Sorry, I haven't.
Got a 50% saying yes and 43% saying no.
Okay, that's quite interesting. So this is my take on that question. So this is the typical user journey according to the Williams review, which I'm sure some of you will have read, from booking tickets to moving through a station, boarding a train, and the actual journey. My view is that they don't really care about what we do on our assets. They just want their journey to be as smooth as possible. So ideally, they would like us to come in, do some intervention work, do some maintenance, renew a bridge, refurbish a station, do a heavy overhaul on a train, and disappear without them even knowing that we were there. So act a bit like ghosts. And that's, from their perspective, I think that's what they're most interested. However, are they customers or stakeholders? Because our stakeholders care about quite a few other different things like ambience, accessibility, performance, the environment, safety, value. And these pressures change over time. If I was presenting this slide maybe 10, 15 years ago, environment wouldn't be as important as it is today. Maybe 30 years ago, accessibility wouldn't be as important as it is today. And all these pressures impact the type of decisions that we make, whether they're tactical decisions on what should we be doing today, or strategic decisions about what is the railway going to look like in 30, 50 years time, and how are we going to manage our assets. I'm going to go through some digital tools now that help make those decisions. So these tools are in use or in deployment. By in deployment, I mean they're being developed on as we speak. The top left one, the track circuit monitoring, some of you might be familiar with this. It's in use on London Underground. What this does is that it takes key performance data on how track circuits perform in terms of the voltage and the frequency. And you get a current trace, or you get a voltage trace or a frequency trace that constitutes a healthy asset. What you're then able to do is build up a history of these traces, and then as things deteriorate, say the track bed gets wet and resistance increases, or you're starting to get block joint failures, you'll start to see these traces change and morph. And it's identification of that before they lead to an actual failure that enables London Underground to intervene and repair before the user, our customer, sees anything. Below that is another example of a weather services analytics platform that's currently being developed by Network Rail in their II program. So what this does, it maps geotechnical asset data with weather data, so you can quickly, relatively quickly, identify where your high risk assets are from impact from weather. This then helps people will help Network Rail make decisions about what to maintain, how to maintain it, whether they renew the asset or replace it with a different type of asset if it's experiencing prolonged periods of poor weather. In the top right, there's a solution called Moran, which is developed internally by Arup. This is a holistic tool that does a lot of different things, but the visual that you can see at the moment, what it's showing is facilities management for a commercial building, but can equally be applicable to a station. And I've seen similar technology being used on stations. It monitors people flow, and it determines, well, if a particular floor is not being used, maybe we should be turning off, it automatically turns off the lighting, turns off the heating or the cooling. If an escalator is not being used, then it would turn off that escalator. So it optimizes the building facilities around customer usage and patterns. So what this does, it gives the customers and users what they want, while at the same time delivering some of those wider business benefits. The bottom example there is an image from an aerial survey piece of some aerial survey technology. It's a LiDAR image that's been sectioned. So this is being used for a number of different applications, but in this example, it's been used to understand how vegetation is growing, so that we can understand when it's starting to encroach onto the railway, and we can understand how it's affecting maybe signal sighting or the train gauge, so that preventative action can be made and we can forecast into the future. The other aspect of this is that as environment is becoming much more important within our daily lives, Network Rail are changing their focus from treating vegetation as a liability, as something as a problem, into an asset, so that we can promote biodiversity in different locations. This tool is going to help us, enable us to do that in a much more cohesive fashion. And as a result, it will help demonstrate some of those, or help prove that we're demonstrating some of those environmental credentials. Another poll. Have you seen Ready Player One? A bit more or read Ready Player One. Okay, that's interesting. So I'm going to talk a bit about the future, and that's why I asked the question about Ready Player One. For those of you who've seen it, my vision of the future is a bit kind of like the Oasis. So you'll hear a lot of the term digital twin or machine learning or AI in this sort of space, but what does that actually mean? Well, effectively, it's a digital representation, a copy of a asset in the digital world. And why is that so great? Well, you can create alternate realities. You can do things like test different scenarios out in these realities. You can understand your assets in terms of you can maintain your assets virtually before you actually get to maintain them on the ground. So these tools will enable us to better understand our assets and also test things that we haven't been able to test in the past. Some of these tools and technology is available or is emerging, but the vision of Ready Player One, I think, is somewhere in the future, and I think that's where we are actually heading. And machine learning and clever analytics, well, but for those of you who have seen Ready Player One, it's the inbuilt AIs that provide information that can analyze data and provide useful information that comes off the back of it. I've also listed a number of organizations down the right-hand side: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Google, Amazon. There could be a number of others. And the reason why I've done that is because I think these organizations are leading the way in, okay, they may be commercial organizations, but the technologies and the techniques that they're using are really applicable to how we manage our assets or how we intend to manage our assets in the future. An example would be Twitter. So someone sends a tweet, a group of people follow that, they respond to that tweet, they have a debate about it. How is that any different from a train tweeting out saying, I'm unhealthy, my bogies are deteriorating, and a technician then picking up that tweet, dealing with it, and replying back saying, yes, I've fixed you. Or Google, in terms of the clever analytics that they run. I'm sure you're all aware that through cookies, as you're browsing, the adverts that pop up are related to your browsing history. That clever analytics, if we could apply those same tools and techniques on our data sets, we could infer quite a few different things that we're not inferring at the moment. So I think these organizations are definitely leading the way, and we should be looking to follow that. Okay, final poll, I promise. Where do you think the largest challenges lie in the railways adopting these digital technologies? I've used the potty method here, so please pick one that best suits your view. Okay, I'm going to give my view now, but 75% organization. That's interesting. Technical glitch here.
So yeah, if you move on with your presentation, it should sort itself out, Kunal.
Okay. Can everyone see the presentation or not? No. Okay. So I've got views on each of these areas. So particularly around technology. The rate of change of technology is much faster than our humans' ability to adapt to it. Also, railways are quite conservative in nature. As such, they're not generally used to picking up technology on the fast development cycle that it experiences. So we generally want something that's proven. As a result, we deal with a lot of obsolescence issues, which I think is going to become more and more of an issue, more and more of a concern. From a process perspective, these tools and techniques are all based on agile delivery, which means that you build something and then you build upon it, and then you build upon it, and then you build upon it. In typical engineering, where railways normally sit, we much prefer a waterfall delivery lifecycle, which is really good from a risk perspective. So system risk perspective, how do you know what the end system is going to be, so you can understand what the risk is going to be to the railway. So I think that's a challenge in terms of how do we marry an agile process with our understanding of system risk. The one that's most got the highest percentage here in terms of organization, I think this is also a big concern in terms of we generally operate in our silos. So if you think about these tools, generally they're about for a drainage asset or for a track asset or a signaling asset or a rolling stock asset. But we need to think much more in the systems view. A good example is if a drainage asset is failing, it's probably going to have a knock-on effect on the track circuits, which are probably going to be bobbing. It's probably going to have a knock-on effect on the track in terms of its stability, the earthworks in terms of its stability. Unless we have a system view, we won't really iron out that it's the drainage that's causing it. We'll end up continuously fixing the signaling, the track, the earthworks, without getting to the true root cause, which generally does happen. And the last one around information. If you speak to Google, what they'll tell you is that if you collect everything and we'll sort it out later and we'll do all the analytics and we'll don't worry, just collect everything, which is fine if you're a tech company. But if you're a 21st century railway running on 19th century infrastructure, actually capturing that information is quite hard and expensive. So we need to be much more cute about what information we're collecting, how frequently we're collecting it, and how do we turn this into knowledge or wisdom. That's the end of my presentation. And
I think we've got the screen back now.
You have, yes. So that's what I've just gone through, those 4 areas.
Right, thank you very much, Kunal, and I'm sure there'll be some great questions coming in at the moment. We are going to hand over to David Moran now. Oh, that's not you, just yet. And
excellent. Oh, here we go. Right, show my screen. Can you hear me?
yes, we can.
Excellent.
Over
Can
to
you see that?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Kunal. Thanks, Brianna, and welcome everybody. So I'm here to talk to you about how rebranding can reveal the extent of a passenger's touch points with a train operating company. So the theme being around customer experience and digital. I come to you from part of Arup. I'm a digital advisory leader in Arup, looking after a team of people that work with customers, understanding how they can exploit technology for improvements. So I'm here to talk to you a bit about branding and customer experience. And first I wanted to start with a quick question. I mean, what is in a brand? So here's an example of some brands, some logos. What does a brand mean? So typically it will mean some kind of identity, some kind of trust. Typically it will provoke a response in you. So everybody on this call today will look at these brands, and some of these you will identify with. Maybe you buy your clothes from Patagonia, maybe you do your searches in Google, and others you might not identify with and definitely steer clear. And in fact, all of these companies will have their own kind of feeling about their brand and how their brand is positioned against other brands, even to the extent where they will be very concerned about who they are placed next to when they're on a slide like this. So why is that important? Well, if you take a look at train operating companies, and here are all of the franchise train operating companies down the left-hand side without their branding, then they're in business to convey people from A to B, but in doing so, they provide a passenger experience, a customer experience. I'd encourage you to take a look at some of the data that is available, freely available, either from the ORR or in this case from Transport Focus, looking at some of the metrics on passenger satisfaction. And I think what you might find is looking at this data and trying to compare what you see in the media, you might see some differences or something that was a bit of a surprise. So overall satisfaction, 82%. And that's pretty good and that's pretty consistent, although you will also hear stories about satisfaction at 12-year lows or 13-year lows. And you will see in this list, there are some markedly different performances, for example, on value for money and on how they deal with complaints. So what is going on here? Well, ultimately, we want to make sure the passengers have a good experience and then use the train more. Why do we want to use the train more? Well, I'd like to just talk through this slide very, very briefly because I think this is quite instructive to people that like the rail industry and like to get on trains as I do. When you actually look at trains as a share of transport, we all know they're more sustainable than any other mode of transport. We all know they're good from getting to A to B, centre to city centre to city centre. But actually, if you look at the statistics of passenger mode share, look at that, 2% of trips made in Britain are on the train, 9% of distance travel. And if you take a look at the chart on the right-hand side, the thing to note about these graphs, and you're all engineers, so you could probably see that straight away, is they're different scales. So whilst it looks like rail has done really well since privatization, and you will have heard those messages, look at that, 66 billion passenger kilometers in rail, and it's going up. Compared with cars, vans, and taxis, it looks like it's flatlined. But actually, if you look at those numbers, cars, vans, and taxis are still 10 times more popular by billion passenger kilometers than rail. So that therein is the scale of the challenge, but also the opportunity for train operating companies. Okay, so what does that mean in practice? Well, if you're like me, when you get on a train, you will have a very variable experience. You'll have an experience like I'm showing on the slide here. And this is because your journey has a number of different touch points with the train operating company and its partners, its catering providers, its ticketing providers, its technology providers, and the people on board, the people in the stations. So any typical journey that you make may look like this one. So typically you might go to the station, you've got a good price, you're looking forward to the journey and getting to the destination, and you turn up and it's late. So there immediately it goes down. And the worm goes down. So this is like a kind of a worm that you might see in kind of election broadcasts. You get on the train, you can use your laptop, the Wi-Fi is kind of working okay, but of course you get that kind of that horrible moment when you're on the train and it just comes to a stop, and you weren't expecting it, so you know something is wrong. Get moving again, and then when you get to the destination, if you're late, I think at least the good news is as long as you're on the train and it was delayed and you can go to the trouble of filling the form, typically you'll get your refund without any quibble. Rather not be delayed in the first place, but very often you'll kind of get these sorts of things without too much agonizing. So that's typically the kind of journey that I would go on, and each journey is a journey of discovery. So these sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, and typically what we're looking to do, all of the train operating companies are trying to make sure that every interaction you have with them is a positive interaction. So well, how does it all relate to rebranding? So just very briefly, I want to talk about the rebranding experience of LNER and all the kind of different touch points that presents that you may not have been aware of until now. So LNER began intercity East Coast operations in June 2018. It was formed by taking Virgin Trains East Coast into public ownership. I was part of the team that got involved in that. It was part of Arup's operator of last resort obligations, where in the event of some kind of interruption or challenge to a train franchise, the Secretary of State has an obligation to keep the trains running, keep people getting to where they need to go, and they rely on Arup as the lead to manage the operator of last resort function, which advises on bringing those train operating companies into public ownership. And as part of that, part of the technology due diligence required full physical and digital rebranding to the new company, which was LNER, London North Eastern Railway. So not only the transfer of ownership, but overnight, at a stroke, we needed to completely change the identity of the company, without interrupting any of the train services. So what I'm going to do, in a bit of a whirlwind tour of the network, I'm going to take you on that customer journey. And all I'm going to do is take you through that journey, a bit like the worm before, but I'm going to show you all of the different touch points that you may or may not see yourselves on these journeys. And I think it's quite interesting to see the breadth of these. Okay, so let's go on a journey. Oh, and one thing I should also add, a bit like the best movies, there are some continuity issues in this slide deck. Okay, so you will see different images from different stations, and maybe the eagle-eyed people will see where the rebranding has not quite worked, and I'll point one of the two of those out as well. So we're going to go on a journey, and we're going to start our journey on social media. So typically on social media, you'll go to Twitter, you'll take a look if there's any interruptions or if there's any guidance for the journey, and of course right now a lot of COVID-19 guidance, and we'll hear a bit more about that from Jim later. So I want to go and take the plunge, buy a ticket. So here is the website that I buy a ticket. And of course, it's not just the images and the logos and the videos and the text, the actual URL as well. So lner.co.uk needed to be bought, purchased, implemented, and then applied to the website. So I bought my ticket. So I go to the station, I park at the station. Here we are at the car park at the station. This is the signage on the station to show how much it costs. And then I decide to go and do that online. So here is my receipt on the signage, and there we go. We can see the LNER branding there. Okay, so I've now parked my car. I'm now going to go into the station, and I'm going to take a look at the boards that when I want to see where my train is. And you can see I'm very interested in the 7:30 London to King's Cross. The eagle-eyed amongst you will see cross country on the left-hand side there, and ScotRail on the right. And so we're in Edinburgh Waverley at the moment. And of course, what you can't hear is that there are messages on the tannoy being made as these trains are being announced. And again, LNER is mentioned in the audio announcements. Okay, so got to go and collect my tickets that I ordered online. So here we are, rebranded the ticket vending machine. And some of you will automatically immediately spotted the kind of problem that we have when we're trying to rebrand this stuff top to toe in one day, essentially. So top of there, you've still got some kind of decals there on the machine about buying trains, Virgin Trains East Coast on the old URL. But then again, within individual screens, there's the logo there again. So you can see, even at this point, we have gone on social media, we've booked tickets on the website, we've parked the car, we've looked at where the trains are going, we've looked at tickets, and all of these are passenger touch points where you can make a difference to your customer. And of course, what you would do is you might go to a station like Leeds or King's Cross or other Network Rail stations, and you have a range of different ticket vending machines to go to from a range of different train operating companies. And of course, what the train operating companies want you to do is to go to their ticket vending machines, because they then get the commission for the sale. So the better the experience, the easier it is to identify the brand, the more trust in the brand, the more you're going to drive your revenue up. So let's keep going. So I've got my ticket, and here's my ticket receipt. And as you can see, top right, the ticket receipt is rebranded with London North Eastern Railway. And those of you that want to just check it, you'll find the VAT registration number also matches the company, because that is part of the branding. That's very important for business customers, for example, to understand the VAT number. And then so we go on our journey. So we're very lucky because we're going to go into the first class lounge, and here you can see the first class lounge has been prepared with the LNER signage, so you know it's the LNER first class lounge that you're in. And you want to make use of the Wi-Fi whilst you're there. So here you go. So I've logged onto the Wi-Fi. Suddenly, so it seems that we're in the Doncaster First Class Lounge, which doesn't exist, I hasten to add. But you can imagine yourself in the Doncaster Wi-Fi lounge using the station Wi-Fi. So this is station Wi-Fi we're looking at right now, different from train Wi-Fi. So time to go and get the train right now. So we're going to go to the platforms. And as we go to the platforms, I'm just going to double check these information touch points. Which will help me guide me on the way, provide me information, particularly if I don't have a touchscreen phone, a smartphone. I can get all the information related via these channels. And you can see on the left-hand side again, that was a screen that was not updated during the day, and on the right-hand side they were progressively updated during the day, because these being digital screens, you could prepare the updates ahead of time and push them out all through the network through the course of the day. So on the left-hand side there's a Virgin Trains branded one, and then later on in the day they become progressively LNER. So we now get to the platform. Here we are again with the train. There's the LNER branding at the bottom of the information. And whilst I'm waiting for the train to pull up, I'm looking at the information on the platform. So here comes the train. You'll see the train, a little bit more difficult to rebrand because it has to go into the depot. You can see down the right-hand side, but you can very clearly see this is a Virgin train. And if you look at that number 43272, you can probably Google that number and you will see images of that particular carriage probably going back to the 80s. Okay, so these are the identities. They'll have multiple brands over the years, but you'll be able to see that. Probably a challenge there. 43272, golden spanner for reliability. Go and look at the different branding it's had over the years. So we're on the train. We know it's an LNER train, but it's branded Virgin, but that's okay because when we're on the train for security, we're reassured because we can see LNER and the CCTV logo there, which is required by law. And I can just check out the route according to the LNER timetable. So I'm on the train now. I'm looking to connect to the LNER Wi-Fi. And this is a common problem on Wi-Fi on trains, as I'm sure everybody's seen this. So here's the classic, I can't connect to the Wi-Fi, so I'm sure we could probably just employ people to roam up and down the network, helping people to eventually get to the Wi-Fi, which at the time in 2018, you could get 15 minutes for free if you were in standard class. So after about 15 minutes, maybe you're going to have to go and buy your Wi-Fi total voucher in order to use Wi-Fi more. And again, you can see there's a bit of a glitch there, so it's not the right branding. And again, so maybe I'm doing this on my phone, maybe I get a little bit worried because it's not the LNER branding I expected, and you can see that worm going up and down according to the experience. So after all that excitement, I decide to go to the refreshments counter. So here I am now, I've walked down the train, and again, I'm going to be paying contactless because I'm worried, particularly in the current day and age. And here are the electronic point of sale machines, and again, rebranded London North Eastern Railway. And here is my receipt on the right-hand side, again with the right branding on it. And you can see I've got an Americano and a cookie and a hot drink deal, which is well worth it. I think they still do that, so well worth checking out. Okay, so I've now gone through all of my I've gone through the ticket process. I've gone through the Wi-Fi and the lounge. I'm on board. I've now bought my drinks, and by the time we pull into the station, lo and behold, miraculously, the train has rebranded itself on its way to be LNER. Okay. So and then we can depart, and then hopefully that worm line has been above average all the way through. So on each and every one of those touch points, you can see there is an opportunity to delight your customer. So that was really a very quick whistle-stop tour of rebranding a TOC and all the different touch points. What would be good, I think, and what I'd ask everybody is the next time you go on a train journey, just look out for all of those different touch points that you see yourself. Because each one is an opportunity for you to deliver good customer experience and delight the customer so they come back for more and drive more people to trains. Excellent, that's me. Thank you very much.
Unmute myself. Thanks, David. And lots of things to think about there. And I'm sure, again, we've got some questions coming in, which we will hear of shortly. And now over to Jim with a very topical topic.
Okay, share my screen.
Brilliant.
So good evening, everybody. My name's Jim Peacock. I'm an Associate Director in the Transport team at Arup, and I specialise in people movement. And what I wanted to share with you over the next 10 or so slides is some of the capability, some of the skills that we've been bringing to bear for our clients in terms of understanding the impacts of COVID-19, in particular in relation to stations and socially distant stations. And a lot of the work we've been doing has been underpinned by pedestrian planning and pedestrian modelling. So for those of you who aren't aware of the discipline, pedestrian modelling is essentially technical analysis and simulation to support the planning and design of environments that are subject to very high volumes of pedestrian movement. Typically, we're analysing capacity and congestion, and it's not just the transport sector we operate in. We've got a global team with 25 years experience operating across a range of markets. In terms of our station projects, and I won't go through this full list in its entirety, but Arup's heavily involved in HS2, in particular on Euston Station and Birmingham Interchange. I myself am working on the sort of network rail response to HS2 at Euston, the redevelopment of Euston Conventional Station, or the REX project. We've got people working on Crossrail 2, Luton Dart, various city centre railway stations there that you can see across the UK, and then a number of metro projects, in particular in Australasia. And what do we normally look for, I guess, in a pre-COVID world? As I said before, we're sort of analysing capacity and congestion and using this, I guess, these metrics called Fruin level of service criteria, where level of service A in blue is free circulation, level of service F, which is a complete breakdown in pedestrian flow, is shown as red. And typically we're designing for level of service C because it gives us a balance between infrastructure provision and congestion levels. So we can see in this example, we've got escalators, people going through a gate line, that's performing as we'd expect it to. So COVID came along, beginning of the year, probably spun everything onto its head for us. We went overnight essentially from planning for moving lots and lots of people around stations, keeping them tightly, bunched together, but moving them efficiently through those spaces, to having very few people on train services and in stations, and having to keep them as far apart as possible. And just some demand information there. The orange line on that graph shows national rail usage through March 2020, and you can see how that really just falls away through middle of March and almost to nothing with the announcement of lockdown on 23rd of March. But that's an evolving situation. We have sectors of the economy that are reopening. We had non-essential retail opening up on 15th of June, hospitality on the 4th of July, so everyone could go down the Wetherspoons and enjoy Super Saturday. And then I understand that from 1st of August, there'll be some changes to the advice in terms of working from home. So there's a backdrop of sort of ever-evolving demand considerations. So in terms of the sort of the recovery from COVID, I think we're sort of placed in the middle of these three phases, if you like. So there was an initial rapid response phase, often with improvised measures, lots of gaffer tape everywhere, tents of barriers in our stations. We're now moving into a phase where we're living with social distancing in some form, or if not social distancing, then some form of mitigation, so face coverings and masks. And then longer term, we may need to plan our stations differently. We may need to design our rolling stock differently to be flexible to accommodate future pandemics. And we may need to understand how, or we will need to understand how demand is changing as we come out of COVID. So I wanted to touch on those three themes, starting with, I guess, the sort of rapid response measures. And this is an evolution of the rapid response measures, but a lot of you will have seen these if you've been down to your local station. We've got announcements, signage, floor stickers, essentially guiding us through stations, telling us essentially on every step of the journey what we should be doing. The image on the right is from Stratford Station in London, and they've implemented, for example, a one-way system both on their stairs and in the underpass beneath the platform. So trying to eliminate bi-directional movement and face-to-face contact. So where we come in is actually trying to understand how effective some of those measures, those operational overlays are, and how long they will be effective for as demand begins to increase. So we've got our own pedestrian simulation software called Mass Motion, and we've built in a proximity analysis tool, which in essence shows whether people are socially distancing or not, either with a colour blue being that they're far apart from other people, or red in this instance being less than 2 meters away from other people. And the image on the top there is a station in business as usual operation, lots of bi-directional movement, in particular on the stairs, not much social distancing happening. So this is quite a risky environment in terms of transmission of COVID. Whereas down at the bottom, we've implemented a one-way system, and we've essentially got people coming in from the right-hand side of the screen, entering into the station, going down to the platforms. Anybody who comes up exits to the left-hand side of the screen, and that one-way system that we've introduced, you can see, has been very effective in delivering social distancing in that environment. Another example, hopefully with a video that will run here, but we've got a simple terminus station platform operation. People are lighting a train, going through the gate line, walking through a crowd of boarders looking at information screens. Certainly that's what's happening on the left-hand side. That's the normal operation scenario. Then those boarders go through the gate line, very little social distancing, high risk situation. On the right, we've got various interventions that we've brought in. The alighters are a lot more circumspect as they come off the train. They're trying to keep social distance. They're moving through the gate line. We've closed some of the gates to try and provide appropriate spacing at the gate line. And then we've created a queuing system for boarding passengers to make sure that they're also the appropriate distance apart. And one of the things you'll notice from this, from a sort of operations point of view, is there's not just a spatial impact of trying to plan for social distancing in our stations, but also a significant time impact. So the train on the left was turned around very quickly and could have gone back out of the station fully loaded. The train on the right, we're still boarding that train. So a significant time impact, not just a spatial impact. And then the image at the bottom is some of the metrics that we can produce. So we can map the time that people spend in close proximity. Where we've got red there, we've got people spending 150 seconds at less than 2 meters apart. So that's that's a riskier situation than potentially the scenario on the right-hand side where we've introduced various interventions. So this modelling, I think, is about demonstrating, to our clients, Arup's clients, but then also for our clients to demonstrate to the travelling public that essentially the risk of transmission has been, mitigated as best as possible. But of course, we're in an ever-evolving situation. It's not just the demand components that are changing, but also the guidance is changing. We now have mandatory face coverings on public transport, so masks, and that's allowed a change from the 2 meter social distance that we did have to 1 meter plus. And what that has instituted, I guess, is a change, I guess, in some of our clients' expectations. They're now interested in the pedestrian modelling side of things and understanding the spatial components, but they're also interested in combining that with other forms of modelling and analysis. So combining, my skill set with, say, our ventilation and HVAC engineers, understanding how ventilation systems, both in stations but also on rolling stock, can be reconfigured and actually reduce the risk of transmission. And then thinking ahead to that last stage of the 3 stages of recovery, the sort of more longer term impacts and planning for those. It may be that future station and rolling stock design is going to need to change as a result of COVID. There's a headline there from the Architects Journal with the head of HS2 saying, potential redesign, and that could be, planning in bigger spaces, more resilience for social distancing in those stations. It might be changes to the sort of level of service parameters that I showed earlier on, and we may see new processes. So as Kunal has already shown, the Neuron AI platform is a platform that's been developed by Arup, and this is a thermal imaging software that we've overlaid on that platform, measuring people's temperatures as they come into a building. And those sorts of processes may become the norm in our stations. They certainly will be in a number of the airports around the world. We need to understand how demand is going to change in the future. We've got a team using agent-based models to try and understand what the sort of permanent impacts of COVID might be on travelling public. So will there be a sector of of demand that simply just falls away as a result of COVID, and with more people deciding that they want to work from home? Will there be permanent shifts to different modes? So we need to know that information. We need to be able to build that readily into our pedestrian simulation tools. And then lastly, we're constantly evolving our tools. We're using our mass motion engine to bring in real-time passenger data from cameras. We've got a fully immersive environment where you can put on virtual reality headsets, I should say, walk through a station environment, essentially put yourself into the body of one of those people in those models, and actually see and feel how a station might operate, understand the wayfinding, listen to the announcements. So we're constantly evolving our tools, and similarly, I guess, to the proximity analysis tool that I showed in relation to COVID, we're hoping this kind of innovation will help us stay ahead and cater for the future customer experience. So thank you very much for listening. That's what I wanted to share with you this evening.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Jim. And I'm sure, again, there'll be lots of questions coming in. I know I've got some myself. And I might start with one for you, Jim, while I still get you in the line and while everyone else is putting their cameras on. Hopefully you'll be able to, we'll get a little Q&A box up there. So this one's for Jim, which is thinking about our experience around pandemics and how it all seemed to hit us very, very quickly. Was this something that any clients had come to you with beforehand, hoping to preempt it, or was it something that really took us all by surprise?
I think in this part of the world, it definitely took us all by surprise. I think in parts of Asia where the SARS pandemic obviously was more virulent, I guess, in the past, then I think some of the response measures were probably quicker. There's a cultural awareness of mask wearing as well, in terms of reducing the risk of even just common cold transmission. So I think in that part of the world, not necessarily preempting it, but certainly able to accommodate it perhaps more quickly than in Western Europe. But I don't think anyone really saw it coming.
Okay. And right, we will move on to some questions from the audience. Keep them coming in, please. We've got a couple of great ones so far, but I'm sure with 53 people on the line, we can get a few more for our panelists here. So we'll move on to, I think this one's for Kunal, which is about how does the rail industry tap into the big tech companies' know-how?
That's a really good question. I think tapping into the big companies' know-how isn't the issue. I think it's I think that's readily available. They're equally happy to work with any customer. I think the bigger issue is around how do we adapt our archaic processes to enable them to thrive in our environment. And I think that's the question we should be asking. So how do we marry their fast development cycles in our waterfall type approach? I don't think I answered the question, but
say, any ideas there? Do we entice some of them over?
Well, I agree. I don't think it's an issue. I honestly think that they're happy to work with rail companies. I don't think it's a problem. When I was at London Underground, I never found it an issue getting involvement with any tech company. So.
Okay, and one for you, David, here. Do you think that a move towards branding that doesn't change between franchise would be beneficial?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, that is what is happening. So so typically, and there are still complicated questions about ownership of who actually owns the brand. but the branding is not associated with any one particular company as such. It's associated with the train franchise. And that is an attempt to just reduce the cost, but also you can see some kind of consistency between South Western Railway or London North Eastern Railway, West Midlands Railway, and so on. So the idea being that, yeah, so you're not confusing people. And you take an example like LNER. I mean, it was Virgin Trains East Coast, and before then it was East Coast, and going way back, it's had multiple identities over the last 10 years, and each one of those costs money and time and effort and confusion for people each time it's done. So absolutely. So that's definitely what you'll find now. Is there's definitely a trend to have the brand attached to the franchise rather than the company, and where there is some kind of over branding, it might be just a little bit of buy a Riva or buy a Bellio. So these things can be easily changed if necessary, which we hope is not necessary.
Right. Next one. So this one is from Rizba, who unfortunately has left. Sorry, I haven't acknowledged that Toby was the tech company question, and then we had Chris Devlin with the question about branding. So this one is from Rizba, and the question is, Network Rail have largely separate infrastructure and safety, technical engineering, project development silos. Is this setup reasonable or counterproductive in the opinion of the speakers? Shall we start with Kunal? I feel like that one.
So I think they need to be independent for safety reasons. I think that's quite important. But I think they've got to work differently to the way that they currently work. A more matrix type approach, I think, would be beneficial. That's much more flexible than it currently is. It does hinder, from my experience of intelligent infrastructure, it does hinder progress.
Well, I mean, I'd add to that by saying any way you organise an organisation, there are going to be kind of groups that work together and close association, and then there are going to be boundaries between other teams, and that can hinder kind of collaboration. So certainly, I think you've got to kind of focus on the outcomes more than anything. So if you're getting trains that are punctual and infrastructure that's performing and all of those things are going well, then you're onto something right. But it doesn't mean that all the problems of the organisation are solved. It just means that overall the whole combination of those is the right combination. I think in Network Rail's situation, part of the organisation is absolutely designed to be resilient to any kind of change whatsoever. It needs to run a timetable day in, day out, and it is absolutely designed not to deviate from that with very success. And then there are other parts of the organisation that have to be thinking about what's going on in control period 7, 8, and 9, and 10. And you can see the kind of the tension. So that what you want is to foster an environment and a culture inside there where you've got that collaborative tension, as opposed to two parts of the organisation fighting one another. But you'll always get those boundaries, and it's about working together to try and make sure that you're getting the right outcomes at the end of the day.
Jim, did you have anything you wanted to add to that one?
I'm not sure I can, to be honest. So I'll just jump on the bandwagon behind Dave and Kunal. I think those are two very good answers. So.
Okay, and this one I think is for you then, from Simon Kendler, which is, what's the rationale for designing HS2 around social distancing when COVID should be long gone by the time the first section opens in 2026 onwards?
It's a good question. I mean, I'm not close. I'm not working on HS2 myself, but I mean, in terms of the design component, I think it's just having some of that resilience in there. So from a station planning perspective, that might be more space, and that space could be used in case of, I guess, disruption, or in case there might be another pandemic. And you need to socially distance again, and maybe that space is used flexibly with pop-up uses and other uses, during normal operations and when things are going well. But it might be, and I didn't read the full article, I must admit, but I skim read it. But I think there's other things around ventilation systems and being able to put filters on there, or using UV light to control pathogen level transmission, etc. So there's probably a multifaceted response that is needed to try to safeguard, I guess, against a future pandemic. I guess going back to your question, Brianna, from the start, if you don't see it coming, then the best thing is to at least be prepared, flexible, and resilient, and be able to accommodate it as best as possible.
And I think from some of the things I've been reading and listening to, there's been a lot of scientists that are telling that pandemics will be the kind of concern of the 21st century. So probably being prepared for the next one or being flexible to adapt to it is very, very important if we want to survive through it. Right, there's a lot of questions coming in about asset management here. Kunal, you're in the hot seat. The rest of you can rest easy at the moment. How does the UK compare to other countries when it comes to rail asset management, both in the Europe and Asia? And that one is from Chris again.
So how does it compare to, well, the context is very different. So we are one of, if not the oldest railway in the world. So we're running a 21st century railway on 19th century infrastructure. Nobody else in the world, I think, is doing that. So our challenge is much greater than anywhere else. So to compare between ourselves and other areas is difficult, because we're not comparing apples with apples. So if you went to Asia, their railways are 20, 30 years old, and they're much more mature in terms of they've got a lot of these tools and techniques already built in from the start. So it's much easier to do some of this digital asset management than it is for us. That said, I've personally had experience of when they come to see us at London Underground, they're much more awed by what we're doing with the infrastructure we have and how much we're maximizing that infrastructure. So as I said, it's quite difficult to compare. So it's a difficult question to answer because we're not comparing apples with apples.
It sounds like we can learn a lot from each other at least. So
yeah.
Okay, this one is coming from Dom Ultram, which I think might go back to a point that you've made, Kunal, but I think everyone on the panel will be able to contribute here, which is, with the presentation poll showing that 75% of people agree that people/behaviours are the main blockers to technology adoption, what measures would the panel suggest could be used to implement change going forward and thus reduce this percentage?
I start. So I was really pleased when I saw that, actually, because I think everyone's really got the message. I think this is drummed into people time and time again, particularly on big programs, that they're not about technology adoption or the next gadget. They're kind of people programs. And I think a really good example is the East Coast Mainline digital railway, signaling, where if you've got a two-fig match nuke and the whole program, they are constantly beating the drum over. It's a people change. There's significant impacts to employees, to passengers, to asset maintainers, and I think they're very hard, because ultimately these kind of issues make or break programs. But it's easy to forget, because you get obsessed with the scope, you get obsessed with the challenges and the issues and the technical problems, and they're interesting and just to solve. But I think what you do in order to address those is make sure that people and process change and the culture change is all addressed upfront, is all part of that initial planning, and is just as important as the technology and the data and the state and the other kind of the interfaces and the construction methods and the materials, because because it will absolutely make or break a big program.
Just to add, yeah, I think it's technology enabled change. It's not technology led change. So you can have a really bad organization structure, but it's the people that make it work. You can have really bad people and a really great organizational structure, and it'd be way more dysfunctional. So I think putting people at the heart of that is fundamentally how we're going to overcome this.
Okay.
Yeah, agreed. I think putting people at the heart of the process is essential. I mean, I do a lot of work in the aviation industry as well, and cast my mind back to the opening of Terminal 5 at Heathrow, where they spent months going through their operational readiness, making sure baggage systems and check-in systems and all of those things would work. And on the first day of opening, it all fell apart, and it was simply down to the fact that the people working in the terminal didn't know how to log into the new system. I mean, yeah, fundamentals.
Get the basics right.
Yeah.
Walk before we can run. All right, I think we've got 2 more questions here, and then we will let people get off and enjoy their dinner. This comes from Robert Morgan, which is, do you think a significant barrier to delivering the digital twin concept is the economics behind the solution? Who invests in the system and how do they recover the costs, particularly in an industry that is so fragmented?
Yes. It's much easier for, let's say, London Underground to do this than Network Rail, Fox, Tox, Roscoe's to do this, because Network Rail, London Underground own the whole infrastructure from the track to the ticketing to the whole piece. So it's much easier in that scenario. It's much more easier to have that systems thinking and break down those silos in that scenario. It's much more difficult when you've got multiple stakeholders. It's just like the delay minute attribution, all that type of contractual mechanisms that are in place to balance one against the other. How do you put something on a train that's going to benefit something on the track or on a passenger train? That's one example. How do you justify a TOC taking that cost for the benefit of Network Rail? I definitely think it's a big challenge. I don't have an answer to how do we solve it, but I do agree it's one of the biggest challenges.
Okay, sorry, there's still 2 questions to go. And this one I think is for you, David, which is, does route devolution make implementing new digital technology more difficult?
Does route devolution make implementing new technology more difficult? I think it provides more opportunity because you have the routes and the regions are now reacting to local circumstances. They are more driven to work with local suppliers and small innovative organisations who can, and you only need to participate in groups like this and in REAR and other events organised across industry to see the kind of small, medium enterprises that are coming up with kind of new technologies and innovation. And I think it's quite a challenge actually. The route evolution from a supplier perspective is a challenge because you've now got 5 or 14 different customers, whereas you might have been thinking about in terms of one customer with Network Rail in particular. Whereas now you've got multiple different customers, so you have that challenge of trying to differentiate yourself and trying to keep all those relationships going. But actually, each one is going to be evolving at a different rate and a different pace, specific to its local circumstances. And I think that's a positive move. And I think we'll see increasingly the link between track and train as well going forwards, and therefore you'll see an integrated railway trying to deliver better performance across all of those indicators.
Great, thanks. And last question, back to you, Kunal. So asset management is a hot topic tonight. How much predictive modelling is currently used on railway infrastructure, and is there a drive towards more research in this area? What assets would you say are the most difficult to monitor?
So a train is a relatively easy asset to monitor because it goes home every night, and it's easy to add stuff to it. But your infrastructure like bridges, tunnels, your civils infrastructure is the most difficult infrastructure to monitor, and they have long lives, so you don't often replace a whole bridge, so you don't often have an opportunity to put it in at the beginning. Whereas signalling equipment or track has a much smaller life, so you're more able to apply those technologies. What was the first part of the question? Sorry, it was the.
Oh, sorry, I've lost the question now. How's it gone?
Okay. So I think in terms of percentages, I don't have the figures to hand, but it's definitely growing number. It's definitely seen as the way forward in terms of getting information quicker and more accurately, more reliably on your assets. Just jumping back to one of the earlier questions, just something came to mind was around how does the UK fare with other areas? One of the areas that's really poor at asset management in rail is America. So if you want to, that's one of the areas that's yet to be cracked. If you want to go crack America, that's one of the areas you can. There's lots of opportunity out there to make a big difference.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to ask, do any of you have any final words you'd like to give to our attendees this evening? No?
Well, I just encourage everyone to go out and consume, the services of the rail industry as much as you can within guidelines, because that's getting people back on the trains and using that as a preferred mode of transport, I think, is something we need to keep advocating for.
Absolutely, and hopefully you're preaching to the converted a little bit here, and we can take that message a little bit wider. I think most of our careers rely on it a little bit, so we want people back on the railways and using trains again. Well, thank you very much to the three of you. We've heard this evening about how we can take advantage of other sectors, how video games might actually be a sign of things to come in the future, about the challenges and opportunities, and we've got some homework to see how many times we actually see train branding as we go forward and on our next rail journey. And from Jim about the importance of being flexible and the importance of resilience and being able to respond rapidly to change, and how that will probably be defining of station and infrastructure and the railway going forward into the 21st century. So thank you to the three of you. Virtual round of applause from everyone online. And a final message to our attendees that have stuck with us so far, a reminder that YRP has a new website at the moment, so please register on the website, get your new profile set up. Hopefully you've had to do so to attend this evening, but if you haven't, please go on there. You can connect to other people that have attended events and that work in the industry, and follow us on Twitter and on LinkedIn. We advertise most of our events there as well, so if you don't get the emails, you should see them pop up there. Past recordings, if you need to update your CPD hours, if they've been a bit slow over the last few months, sitting at home, you can watch our past webinars that we've been doing over the few months. And if you need something to do tomorrow evening, we have a part 4 of To My Former Self, the careers series, which is being hosted by our Northeast and Northwest committees, which have spoken to people in the rail industry about how they've got there and what they wish they'd known when they started. So some really great tips and guidance that have come out of those so far. So recommend signing up to that one if you can. I think that is it for all of us. Enjoy your evening. Thank you for enjoying us, and hopefully we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Bye-bye, everyone.